Happy holidays from the Signal Watch podcast. The world is full of movies about Christmas and the Yuletide season. But some movies just happen to take place at Christmas for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Hi, I'm your host, Ryan Steens. This holiday season, join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine movies that are kinda, sorta holiday adjacent, more than an actual Christmas movie. It's not exactly Christmas movies, but you can't say they don't occur during Christmas, so you get it. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work.
And welcome to the Signal Watch for a very late holiday 2019, New Year's 2020 podcast. We're wrapping up the holiday season a few days late. I'm not exactly sure when I'm going to release this episode. And we're also doing something new technically. So Marshall is in his home in North Austin. I'm in my home in South Austin. So say hi, Marshall.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing very well. This is all new technology for us, so I think it'll work. So we watched what movie, Marshall? This was your selection.
This was my selection, and the movie was Trading Places, starring Eddie Murphy, Dan Aykroyd, and Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yes. Also has Denham Elliott, Don Amici, and other assorted name talent. This was selected as part of this is what you pitched when I said, hey, let's talk about movies that take place at Christmas but aren't about Christmas, and I think this fits that to a T. This could have taken place any time of the year, it didn't matter, but the Christmas setting, what do you think about the Christmas setting with this movie before we move on to the rest of it?
I think, unlike some movies where the Christmas setting kind of elevates it, I don't think it really helps a lot. When I was watching this movie, I was like, I'm with you. I thought this could have really happened at any time. The Christmas party scene is, I suppose they would say it was essential to the movie, but I don't think so. I don't think this movie, Home Alone is probably the quintessential example where doesn't have to be a Christmas movie, but it definitely elevates the movie. The fact that it's made at Christmas. I don't think this is that. I don't think this is elevated because it happens at Christmas.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The only thing that really, I assume because of the market trading actually does take place on those days, that's when they do get the crop reports or whatever. They probably tried to line it up and they said, okay, starting from this point and moving backward, oh gosh, we're right in the middle of the Christmas season. So I assume that's why. And then, of course, they were able to do some funny stuff with the Santa costume and whatnot to get Dan Aykroyd into the building, which, again, not necessary. There were a lot of ways to do that. There is actually, there's those Funko Pop toys, and just after we agreed we were going to go ahead and do this episode, I saw, not in person but online, a Dan Aykroyd in the Santa suit with the giant sandwich Funko Pop that you can go out there and buy. So that's available as an item you can own in 2020. So this movie thematically how do you feel it resonates here in 2020 versus 1983?
That's probably my favorite part of it. Is I think that now more than ever we've now had Bernie Sanders run in 2 straight presidential elections on what is essentially a class warfare. I think Republicans would call it a class warfare platform. The idea, and I think that what Bernie, I think, has been in the wilderness yelling about this for really what amounts to his entire political career. A lot of his complaints about capitalism have really obtained a kind of wide resonance in terms of the 1% who we can see in Randolph and Mortimer Duke versus really everyone else. And I think one of the messages of this movie is the difference between, I think, what Chris Rock called being wealthy and being rich. They got the idea that Winthrop is a guy who is rich, but he still has to work for a living, to the point where he's handling paychecks for the firm. And whereas Randolph and Mortimer Duke control entirely his wealth and really the wealth of everyone else in their firm. And I think that's that dichotomy between the wealthy, and then between everyone else, is really what drives this movie, and ultimately is the source of the conflict.
Yeah, it's fascinating. In the past decade, we have since lost one of them, but there's so much of like the Koch brothers in Randolph and Mortimer, of this. Let's just go ahead and manipulate things to however we want them, and we'll get the outcome that we want, and be kind of thoughtless about how this impacts everybody else, down the line. And it's just kind of wild to see 2 characters that are just kind of cartoons, but so are kind of the Koch brothers. Anyway, I found that kind of stuff really interesting as I was rewatching it.
And who are the Muppets? Do you remember the Muppets? Who are the 2, like the 2 old guys?
Stanley and Waldorf. Yeah.
Stanley and Waldorf. I feel like this has an element of them too, and maybe I think the Muppet Show predated this. I think it seems to even draw on that caricature of wealth, and there's a lot of caricature in this movie. But what I found to your question, there's all of the caricatures here preserved to really draw in relief, like who's on what side and why. I mean, we were talking about trading places. What really happens, it is an old fish out of water, trading places, Freaky Friday kind of switch that we're dealing with here. What's going to happen when these 2 people switch? But also what happens, and I think this is relevant to what I was talking about with the sort of like labor versus wealth or investor class kind of dichotomy, is that Winthrop kind of realizes that he was really labor all along, and that's played out in a number of the ways that the way this movie is set up. If he was really wealthy, the Dukes couldn't have taken away what he had anyway. Yeah,
that's very true. One of the things I found really interesting too was kind of the stereotypes that you can still see, people parroting and just saying in the real world, both, when we were growing up, there was no social media, but now we have Twitter and we have everyone kind of howling into the void, and kind of how people talk about other people, of those people, you have to look out for them, and even the change from what happens, there's this, we think we can take anybody off the street and put them in Winthrop's place, and we think we can turn Winthrop into a criminal, and that's the dollar bet that we're all familiar with from seeing this movie. But then Eddie Murphy, his character from Valentine says, Billy Ray Valentine says, oh, you have to be hard on these people. I know. And it's exactly the kind of thing that Winthrop would have been saying at the beginning of the movie, that he's now echoing back kind of that mindset of, from a place, a much more informed place. But he starts taking on those mannerisms just as much as Winthrop is now. He's become a criminal, right? Which is what the bet was all along.
Yeah, and that's also the change we see in Murphy, because and I think that's what this movie does really well, right? Is it sets up by trading places, it sets up and it highlights the regression of Winthrop and the change that we see in Billy Ray Valentine. It gives them sort of both equal time. You sort of see how Billy Ray Valentine changes to become more like Winthrop, and how Winthrop changes to become more desperate and affected by his declining situation as the movie goes on. One of the interesting things about, I guess, thematically, is the idea that we talk about class warfare as kind of the idea that Republicans would say, well, what we're doing is you're feeding the resentment of the working class in order to score political points off of the wealthy. But we see it in reverse too, right? And that's why you see like Billy Ray Valentine saying, well, you got to be careful of these people. Once you endow another sector of labor, call it the middle class, call it the upper class, the upper middle class, with wealth, now their politics are to protect what they've earned, and that's kind of what we see in Billy Ray Valentine. Now that he's been endowed with certain with the entrapments of wealth and with money, he is more protective of it, and so you really see both sides of that psychology at work.
Yeah, the party scene where he brings everybody back to the brownstone or whatever it is. And, Coleman's having a good time. It's the first party, clearly, that he's had in the house in a while. But, he's like, oh, these are my things now. And I want to protect all this stuff that I just got, within the last 12 hours. But, yeah, he's immediately like, this is my home. These are my things. And sees how that, people would immediately glom onto him to take advantage. Even the woman in his bed when he goes up to go see what's going on in his own room. All of that stuff happening gives it some insight, and I guess maybe a bit of a sympathetic view. But he certainly would have been one of the people, 36 hours prior, who would have been coming over for that party and not thinking much of drinking somebody else's booze and heading, maybe grabbing the vase on his way out or whatever. As he's, when he first shows up, he starts pocketing things, thinking this is all a scam, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's an interesting POV. We get some of that, including Winthrop trying to sell his watch and he can't get a leg up. He can't sell his $5,000 watch or whatever. Bo Diddley offers him $50.
$50.
Yeah, and so you see that like, well, it's a spiral you can't get out of once you're in it. There's no way to actually start earning that cash, and the only person who's found a way to do it is, of course, Jamie Lee Curtis, who's a prostitute in the movie, who's trying to be smart and save her money as she's doing the sex work. So
I think that's one of the things. I mean, there's a lot that I'm ultimately, I should say, I'm kind of disappointed in this movie. Watching it. I've now rewatched it twice. I saw it initially when I was young, and I saw it on TV. And we can talk about the difference between watching it on television and watching the original theatrical release. But that's the thing that one of the things that I really like about this movie is the way that it's broad comedy. So there are some plot holes. There are some significant things that you can, some significant nits you can pick with this movie. But ultimately, it's a broad comedy, and it's kind of a throwback comedy to a kind of an old Hollywood comedy, from their hooker with the heart of gold kind of premise to the portrayal, to the sort of cartoonish portrayals we see between rich and poor, to the portrayal of the drunk guy, the way he's like sort of exaggeratedly drunk, and I mean there's a lot of Hollywood tropes that they're working with, and I that really added to the movie for me. Ultimately, my first watch I was like, this movie sucks. My second watch, I'm like, now that I sort of see what it's doing, I can sort of broadly appreciate it.
It was funny coming back to it, because it's a movie that I will watch 15 minutes of on cable, while I'm tying my shoes or eating a sandwich or whatever. And I know the movie kind of frontward and backward, because it was one I watched a lot over and over as a kid. And kind of rewatching it this time, what I was like keenly aware of is like even the early setup with Eddie Murphy running into Dan Aykroyd saying help, and then Eddie Murphy like knowing if he gets caught for this thing he didn't do, he's going to be in a world of hurt. He's already going to go to jail for this, so who knows what else, for something that was absolutely nothing that he actually thought he was doing, which really reminded me of like all the stuff now of like people calling the cops on like kids' lemonade stands, or people just being at the park, having a barbecue or whatever. That's a good point. And so it was like, it's played for laughs when he falls down in the kind of boardroom, not the boardroom, but like the club room, and all the cops pull out the guns. In 2020, that's not so funny. Right? I mean, it's like, yeah, people get killed by cops all the time for basically just being there. And that plays, I mean, I still think it at least Eddie Murphy diffuses it, and it's a funny scene, but it's when you have that in the back of your head when you're watching that whole sequence, it's kind of tough going, which I was not expecting on rewatching, because I have seen the movie so many times. I knew exactly how that scene played out, but to actually watch it from beginning to end was a lot different.
It is a collision watching this movie with modern eyes, and sort of like you think about the Karens, right, who complained about black people doing innocuous things. It does have, now looking back on this, you sort of see that, but at the same time, this movie is such a silent, that scene especially is such a silent movie. You could sort of see how everything, the sort of Keystone cops kind of chasing him through the club, and then all the guns are pointed out. You could turn the sound off during that and know exactly what happens, including Dan Aykroyd's character, Winthorpe, complaining to the cops, and the cops, like, what I got on my second rewatch of this movie is just how much old Hollywood storytelling is at work in this film, and how as we both said, I mean, there's a lot that this movie has to say to our modern politics and the way we think about wealth and economics.
Yeah. I did go back, and I had to read like what actually happens in the final sequence when they're. How did they actually come out rich there? Because I realized what I had thought was happening was not at all what was actually happening. Because in my brain, I'm watching that sequence, I'm like, yeah, this is where they kind of figure everything out. I encourage people to go and Google how they actually make money there. Because it's also
there's a great NPR explainer on this.
That's what I read. Yeah, it was the NPR explainer, and we can link to it. But it's one of those things that nobody off the street would ever think of. It's such how money is made in this country as kind of monopoly money is absolutely mind-boggling sometimes.
It really is, and I think the thing that is most important to understand, because I think it's even confusing how they set it up. There's a couple of key points. One, you have to understand that they are trading on inside information. Both parties are trying, both the Dukes and then Winthorpe and Billy Ray Valentine, they're trying to trade on inside information, which at the time was not illegal for commodities when it came to commodities trading. So
which is mind-boggling.
Which is mind-boggling, right? But that's just part of the regulatory state. They had done it for stocks, but not for commodities, which sets up its own kind of arbitrage. But what's key to understand is that the Dukes think they're getting the early crop report and that they're going to trade on this information from their man Beeks. But what the two characters, what Billy Ray Valentine and Winthorpe do, is they steal that information from Beeks and then replace it. And so Mortimer and Randolph Duke are really relying on bad information, what they think is good information, but it turns out to be bad information. That's the first thing. But the second thing is, like, you think, oh, well, that's why they get rich, is because of the mistake that they made. That's part of it. But then it's also because of this other part of commodities trading that you have to understand that is really well explained in the NPR studio, in the NPR article. Because I'm with you, when I watch this, I'm like, well, why are they buying if what they want to do is ultimately sell based on the price mismatch information that they have? And then I realize what they're buying is contracts to sell at a later date at a much higher price than what they actually buy. So it's really the way they get rich, as you say, is really an arcane bit of is like, you sort of have to get the arcane nature of commodities trading in order to understand it.
Yeah, I don't think it's a mistake that they go from kind of them cheering to, okay, now they're on a yacht and at the beach. Like, let's not think about this too much. Let's just say it worked out, and now they're fabulously wealthy.
Yeah, as long as you understand that the thing that I think everybody has to understand is that, hey, the Dukes got swindled because they didn't know they were trading on bad information. It's really an insider trading story. And then I think as long as you go from there to the yacht, you don't have to spend too much time trying to understand, what they were buying were futures contracts and they were really going to sell at this price. That is confusing. Even for me, after the third time watching it, I was trying to do the math in my head and I had difficulty with it.
Two other people make money aside from Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy, and that's Denholm Elliott and Jamie Lee Curtis. We talked a little bit about what their kind of role in the film, and you said she plays a hooker with a heart of gold, and he's playing the dutiful butler, but sort of. I mean, he's the butler who, through some confusing set of circumstances, is actually an employee of the wealthy brothers. And the house is apparently owned by the wealthy brothers, and I never entirely understood that setup, if that had any basis in reality. So it leaves his loyalties, even though he's a butler, he's working class in a lot of ways. He may have a refined accent, but so yeah, it's his life savings is what he puts forward there. But he clearly, as you have those shots at the beginning of the movie where Dan Aykroyd and his fiancée are having dinner, and he's like, "Oh, you have the dessert. We're going to go in the other room and have drinks / have sex."
Right.
But just a quick side note on the fiancée. I looked her up because I'd never seen her in anything else. And apparently she was basically just a model she was a kind of a cover girl for Yves Saint Laurent, and did like this in one other movie, and then she married some guy who's like a molecular biologist, and he's apparently like a really big deal in like RNA sequencing or something crazy. So don't know why she decided to quit acting, because she's perfectly fine in this, but I just found it fascinating that usually someone ends up with like a real estate tycoon or whatever, but she married the RNA specialist. So. But yeah, I think, and we talk about the difference between TV and then seeing this on cable or on HBO or whatever I did as a kid. Is, of course, this is the Jamie Lee Curtis. It gets naked in this movie, and everyone remembers that from a certain point. Some of us, more than others, I guess. But that was definitely something I remembered from seeing this movie the first time.
It's her first time to do that, and which is, I think, notable because she had throughout the 70s sort of kind of refused to do it, and she's in a number of horror slasher flicks prior to this, including obviously Halloween, iconic Halloween, and through all of that she's never topless, never naked in any of those movies. And then all of a sudden, I think it was sort of an explicit condition of her taking this job, and she sort of knew that in order to break to the mainstream, she's talked about this in interviews, which I read as part of my research for this, that she kind of resented it, but she ultimately recognized that if she was going to break through to other mainstream non-horror movies, this was sort of the price that she had to pay. Which bummed me out watching the movie, because when you watch her in the scenes that she's in, those scenes are superfluous. You never really understand why she's getting naked, why she's topless. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And she's very attractive and it's very sexy, but in neither scene does it resonate with me as a scene where, yes, I would expect a woman to not have her top on in this scene.
Yeah, I suspect it was shot so they could put it on TV at some point, so it really didn't matter. I think the big thing was, younger listeners or people who just don't remember all of this, like, that was part of what you had to do to get into more mainstream film back then. Women either did something like this in a movie, or you had your Playboy spread. And so there was always this era of, oh, you liked this actress in, this one kind of B movie. Well, here's her Playboy spread. And you can kind of see it now in when, like, Disney stars decide they want to start doing more mainstream stuff and kind of mature. They don't necessarily do the, Playboy spread anymore. That's become passé, but they certainly do this, like, I'm going to do a really sexy role now. That, like, think about Elizabeth Berkley trying to do Showgirls, right?
Right.
And it's, it works for about 1 in 5 of those actresses trying to make the transition, and it always feels like it's completely unnecessary because it's not. I know they're trying to be, like, mature and move on to a new phase, but yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense that's how that ended up occurring. And, it's John Landis doing a comedy, and that's just part of what was in rated R comedies back in the day.
Well, that's the other part, and I think it's probably hard for people to understand when you go back to these movies, because it's not common now, but it was common certainly, from the Animal House, National Lampoon. That was part of the milieu, right? There's going to be boobs in this movie. When you talk about Airplane, you're gonna have some boobs in this movie, and that was part of the. When you put your money down for your R-rated comedy ticket, you sort of knew, I'm going to get cuss words, I'm going to get nudity, and that was sort of just built into the price, and that's not that different, I suppose, from HBO's prestige comedies now. That's sort of built into the process and what you expect to see. But this felt, even like going back, I'm like, but I don't even get why. At least in Porky's, there's a shower scene, and you sort of understand why people are naked in the shower. This is like, why? For example, when she's sort of mothering him and sort of, hey, I took your temperature, you're sick, you've got to stay in, I'm going to crawl into bed with you. She gets topless before she gets into bed, and that doesn't make any sense. They're not about to have sex. That's explicit from the context. He's rolling over the other way. This is not a sex scene. She's topless for no reason. It's cold. It's New York City or it's Philadelphia in winter, and it's cold. Why is she taking off her shirt? It makes no sense to me. And it was one of the problems I had with the movie. I should say the other big problem that I had with the movie, which you alluded to, but which I think is necessary for the sort of really for the movie to function, is the fact that the Dukes seem to own everything that Winthorpe has. That doesn't make any sense from a real life standpoint. Even if you're working from them, because it's not like he's related to them. He's not their nephew. He's not their son. He's not related to them in any way, and he appears to be a separate W-2 employee of the firm, and who they've hired to run the firm. It makes no sense, and they make that explicit in the movie. Hey, we hired you to manage the firm. Well, why did he get a house, a fully furnished house that has all this stuff in here, along with a butler? I guess we're supposed to think that these are the trappings of the job, but that is, I should say, that's by no means a common arrangement. Where every source of wealth that you have can be taken away in an instant by your boss. That is not what happens in in most situations. But I think it's obviously necessary for the way they set the movie up.
Well, and one of the things that's the salary they state that they're going to give Valentine, I don't know if it's supposed to be the same salary Winthorpe was making, but they say it's $80K a year, which I did a quick inflation calculator, and it basically gets you to about $210 a year, which, like, look, that's not money to sneeze at, but it's also not.
It's not butler money.
Yeah, you're not employing someone to be your butler at that point and living in a house like that, even in Philadelphia, which I'm aware. I'm saying that in comparison to like downtown Manhattan. It's money, but it's not millionaire money. And the suggestion is he's a millionaire. So, I didn't know if there was supposed to be some arrangement of like, look, we pay for all of this, and then it's cash on top of that. So
it's a weird arrangement, and again, it sort of lends itself. This is, if you look at it the right way, this kind of has a sort of, it's sort of a parable. It's not really. I don't think we're supposed to take it seriously, and they've drawn out these cartoonish things. To me, it's almost Princess Bridey in the way that everyone is a caricature of themselves, and there's not much that's actually grounded in reality, except for some reason the hyper realistic world of commodities trading, which is replicated in full.
Which every school child understands.
Every school child understands, you know. Exactly.
Yeah. I will say, I'm not sure I actually laughed when I watched the movie this time, but I don't know if it was because I know every joke and every, like, take to the camera and all of that. But also just kind of realizing, like, the white POV put over the movie and kind of seeing kind of what was going on with Eddie Murphy's character for the first third of the movie. That was just kind of more just taking it in, going, wow, this really plays interestingly right now. Where when I was a kid, of course, you don't know any of this stuff, and you're just like, ha ha ha, okay, he's poor and he's rich, and they're trading places. But I think that there's just so much going on there that's just interesting to see now. And I think a remake would be really interesting at this point, because I think it would cause a lot of conversation on the social medias. I'd be curious to see if they decided to redo this now, what would happen. Because if people would be like, oh, these, the Duke brothers are clearly analogs for the Koch brothers, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know how that would be taken now, because people, of course, are in kind of these warring tribes of who's good and who's bad. So, and I think this tried to do, just by being a comedy, stand outside of it, and we're not so different after all, sort of perspective. It is, because they have this whole thing of nature versus nurture that the one brother wants to get his Nobel Prize for,
right.
And that's the movie's definitely making an argument for circumstances.
It is, and I think one of the things we should get into is, well, what's the answer to that question? Because I think we're supposed to think the answer is, well, you really could trade places, and you really could, broadly speaking, stuff is a matter of circumstances. And I think that's the lesson we're supposed to take from the movie, but I think this movie is flawed in the way that it presents it, because what they really are doing is presenting a version of. I was trying to think of like who else who is in Eddie Murphy's situation is also treated sympathetically in the movie. Because one of the things that I remember seeing one of the things that I remember thinking when we have in the bar scene and in the party, certainly early in the movie, we're meant to think are we meant to think that Randolph and Mortimer could pick any of these people and make them into stock traders? Because that doesn't appear to be the case. Certainly, I don't think that's what the movie's saying. Like, when Eddie Murphy gets all that money, his first thing, and he's in the place and he's having the party, he thinks that he realizes how awful these people are, who are taking advantage of his room, and it doesn't really seem to be that any of them could go. What we instead, the message, at least early on, seems to be is that Eddie Murphy is an unusually Eddie Murphy's character, Billy Ray Valentine, that is an unusually sophisticated example of someone in his situation. And I think that's an interesting take from the movie, because that is kind of the role he ended up playing for mainstream black comedians.
Yeah. I don't think they would have used another character to have the Kung Fu Grip speech about proving he's got this innate understanding of human nature that allows him to think about commodities trading in another way. That wasn't, you weren't going to get that out of the limo driver, or the guy, in the jail.
Right.
Yeah, you're going to get just Billy Ray Valentine as this guy kind of plucked who happens to be able to intellectualize these things. But at the same time, it's not. It's kind of clear that the Duke brothers may not have a head for this either. I mean, they're getting payoffs and
that's right.
Other shenanigans, and having Winthrop take care of their business. So.
No, and I think there definitely are. I think in across the movie, you see in terms of all races and all, you see people carry themselves with dignity and a kind of like, especially when we talk about Denham's character and the chauffeur, this sort of quiet dignity, and also sort of a wry attitude of, I'm commenting on the ridiculousness of the wealth that we see. And in Denham, especially when Denham's dealing with the party, he's not any more shocked by that than he thinks that it's clear that he thinks that the worst scumbags are the two Duke brothers. Oh, yeah. Like, just in terms of his personal disgust, he's more disgusted by them than he is by the I guess the coterie of drug users and prostitutes that Billy Ray has over the house. And I think that says something. Denham is like the soul of this movie. He's the fulcrum at which the plot turns, because he is the one who actually makes it happen. The switch, he enables the switch to occur at the Duke brothers, or he and Beeks affect the switch on behalf of the Duke brothers. But then he's there to sort of be the Jiminy Cricket for both of them, as they sort of try to reconcile what the Dukes have done.
Yeah.
And his face is like super deadpan and amazing. Like he is the straight man for this whole movie in terms of his reaction shots to the sort of cartoonishness, both of the extreme wealth that Aykroyd parodies at the beginning, and then what you see in Billy Ray Valentine. You see him sharing Billy Ray Valentine's reaction to both not just the initial wealth, but then also the corruption he realizes is underneath that as he goes on through the movie.
Yeah, it's interesting to see kind of, you know, his sympathy for Billy Ray as he shows up and kind of does make those suggestions, and his seeming giddiness. That's what's actually happening. It is the silver lining for him after having had punted, you know. But Winthorpe hadn't done a lot to endear himself, I guess, to him until that point. I do like it's just like a 2-second visual thing, but when Winthorpe's, you know, recovered and now he's cleaning his shotguns, and he comes in with even more shotguns to, yeah, we're gonna go hunt these guys down, and you know it's not gonna happen. It's a comedy, but it's a good little moment in there. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly listening to what the Duke brothers have to say, and as they're kind of arguing the nature versus nurture, and of course, you know, no, it's all about, you know, breeding, which of course is this concept that you hear about occurring on the East Coast that just doesn't really happen in Texas. It's a not necessarily how people think of wealth in the areas that I grew up, but I mean, I'm aware of like the Mayflower families and all that kind of stuff on the East Coast, and these ideas of, well, we're just better stock sort of thing, the Blue Bloods concept. I'm sure some of that exists here, but I'm never going to know those people, so I've known a lot of new money people, but I've not known anybody who's multi-generational wealth. So
yeah, me neither. It'd be nice, but speaking of the nature versus nurture thing, I think one of the things that I admire about this movie, I guess the second or third time through, is the commitment they have to really exploring the nature versus nurture theme in pretty much every aspect of this. And I'll give you a couple examples. So there's one situation where Winthorpe is talking about what happened. Like, he's in the aftermath of his helping the police nab Billy Ray Valentine after the so-called briefcase payroll theft. He says, in such a situation, she's talking to his fiancée, saying, she's amazed at the fact that he was able to help the police subdue this dangerous criminal, and he's very much taking advantage of that, saying, hey, in such a situation you have no time to think, instinct takes over, it's either kill or be killed. And I love the way they're sort of embedding the themes into even these minor plot points and discussions. They do the same thing with how, and it's maybe the broadest joke of the whole movie, right, is what happens to Paul Beaks's character, right, where he ends up in a gorilla suit with an actual gorilla shipped away to a foreign land. And now his literal mom is now this gorilla who's taken an affection for him.
Yeah, and I have actually seen people on the Twitters and whatnot when this is aired on cable or wherever they've seen it, like getting really upset by that scene
because of the embedded racism.
Yeah, I think that there's also the not sure if it's the relationship isn't sexual.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, you guys think that a gorilla raping a guy is funny. It's like, well, we had a different sense of humor, I guess, in '83 than we do now. But it's never defined what the relationship is.
It is not. It is not defined. I guess I had read that as being more parent-child, and kind of over I the whole time I'm looking at that, I'm thinking this is I mean, we should say there's explicit racism, including use of the N-word in this movie of the Dukes towards Billy Ray Valentine. And I felt like one of the ways that they balanced that out was the comic effect at the end of making the villain of the movie, I mean, the real villain, Beaks, the bad guy, into a racist stereotype.
Yeah.
So,
that said, this movie also does have the last instance I can think of. Well, that's not true at all. One of the second to last instances of blackface in a movie with a major, Hollywood star.
Yep.
And that's just still mind-boggling every time that comes on screen. By the 80s, that had more or less just totally disappeared, and I think it's supposed to look crappy, but it's just really strange to see. And the reason I said, that's the second to last, is then I remembered looking at still shots a couple days ago of Soul Man, which I had tried to wash from my mind, but
that was what was that, 86 or 87 Soul Man came out?
I would say it was right in that window. Yeah,
it is remarkable looking back, like from where we are now. And this is one of the things that I feel like I don't want to say that I have sympathy for people who wore blackface in the 80s, like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada, and the one time I think governor-elect of Virginia, I forget who his name was, because it's something that never occurred to me that I'm going to wear. Like, I never once did I have the thought, I should do that, or not know that it was highly offensive. But people really need to know that it was played for comedy in the 80s, like, and not just played for comedy, but still played, like, was the basis of the entire Soul Man movie, and was a part of an extended scene. And I think what was supposed to be, again, I really think this movie is intended to be a callback to old Hollywood's fish out of water comedies, and the extensive use of blackface in the 1930s and 1940s. I think that was I want to be generous and say that was a commentary on the old movies, but I don't think so. I think it was. I think they're playing it for laughs here. It's hard to say in what way they're playing it for laughs. Whether it's the idea that it's credible that the villain would believe this, basically, that the villain would believe that this person is black.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was the gag in their head may have been these costumes as they're coming in are getting more and more outrageous. Like, you have Eddie Murphy come in as a somewhat passable foreign exchange student.
Precursor to his Coming to America character.
Right. And then you have Denham Elliott come in as a Catholic priest, and then you have Jamie Lee Curtis show up as Inga from Sweden, that whole exchange.
Right.
And like they don't even quite got their crap together on this. So by the time Dan Aykroyd shows up, it's kind of like, what next, sort of thing. And he's in blackface, and that's super crazy. But yeah, I don't know. I anytime you try and explain a joke, it's obviously failed. So it's weird to see it, and it's something that they don't cut out of the TV version. It's in there because it has to be for the plot to work, and that so much of it kind of keeps going with that. But Dan Aykroyd's never taken it on the chin for that I've seen. So
no, he hasn't, and I'm sure they. Does it seem like to you that all the like when we see these stories in the paper about people doing offensive things, all manner of things, it doesn't seem like people ever use the movies as their defense. And maybe that's because they can't. But there are numerous instances, not just of blackface, but when you talk about people using racial slurs, people saying faggot as he does in this movie multiple times. I mean, Eddie Murphy recently went and apologized for his use in Delirious of the F word, in terms of using derogatory slurs for homosexuals. but doesn't apologize for it in Trading Places when it's really the same thing. I wonder sometimes, like, people just go, oh, that's a movie that was made in this year and I'm going to cabin that off, but they don't cabin off other examples of the same behavior. It's like, for some reason, the movies have a license that nothing else does, and
I would
maybe that's just our affection for Hollywood.
I mean, by the time you get to the point of an actor actually saying a line, no matter how much power they have, that's a script that has been through a lot of hands. You have a director and a crew and producers all standing around who all know what's in the script, and I think at that point you're like, look, we as a unit who made Trading Spaces and continue to make money off of that movie, we that wasn't just Eddie Murphy improvising that line.
That's right.
He owned Delirious, right? And I remember even as a senior in high school trying to watch Delirious and going, wow. And that's 1993. That I was
that's
like,
right. Yeah.
This is not holding up very well.
No.
But yeah.
And I should say that one of the things, I just want to go back and cover one of the things that you mentioned, which is the jokes that are the jokes in this movie aren't actually that good, which is I think strange for a mainstream. I mean, this was a big comedy, a very financially successful comedy, in which somebody makes the S-car go joke, like makes that, like, there is significant time devoted to the fact that a car with an S on it, and the punchline is, I want to make my S-car go. And it's mind-boggling to me that made the cut. And I realize it's supposed to be a guy who's telling a bad joke that everybody laughs at, but that seemed kind of nuts to me. That there were these really bad, obvious jokes. I mean, some of the joke is like the broad, here's my Christmas bonus. It's $5. Maybe I'll go to the movie by myself. Some of the jokes in here just aren't that good, and aren't that funny.
Yeah, I mean, I think you go back and look at like Animal House, and I don't know how actually funny that is on Holding Up. It's more of like a nostalgia trip when you watch it, and I think Blues Brothers has kind of just the sheer power of, John Belushi at the top of his game, and then a lot of other people contributing in, and then of course just kind of the visual comedy of a lot of what happens in Blues Brothers, which this is just kind of like more interesting and kind of, I don't know if I would say warm fuzzy, but it's just not a hilarious movie anymore. The way, like, when I do go and watch, though, Coming to America, I think that is still a genuinely funny movie. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall are just having a really good time doing whatever the hell they want to do in front of the camera. So.
Yeah, no, I agree 100% on Coming to America. And Coming to America, I think it's a fish out of water comedy that is a lot more sympathetic for its characters than I think Trading Places is.
That's about all I got on this one. I'll be real honest. But we have talked for like 50 minutes, so that's.
We have talked. We have. We talk. I do want to talk about a few things that a couple of nits that I picked. One is the way they set Winthrop up. We should say shout out to Paul Gleason, who made a memorable turn in one of our other podcasts in The Breakfast Club as the bad principal in The Breakfast Club. He's here also as the bad guy, and he makes a wonderful villain. But who with almost no dialogue, and that goes back to, like, I think one of the things that's fun about this movie is that a lot of it could be a silent film because of the exaggerated way the characters are and the way that a lot of the exposition is, down to when the elaborate way they expose Winthorpe as the thief, the guy who stole the money. I think it's an iconic scene, the way they pull everybody in there and then they turns over the red X's. It's very visual. But one of the things that bothered me about that scene is they opened that by saying, "This has never before happened in our history." And then all of a sudden, but they use Beaks to set up this elaborate sting and mark the bills with the red X. Well, they wouldn't have done that unless there were earlier reports about similar theft, right? And those would have reverberated throughout the club. I just thought it was clumsy, and it's not the only error that they make. But it's like, if this is really unexpected, if this is really a big enough problem that they've resorted to an outside security firm who's going to set up this elaborate sting that where they ultimately catch a thief, there would have been rumors of this happening before, but instead they say it's unprecedented.
Yeah.
It bothered me. I mean, I've
never thought about it before, other than, yeah.
One of the other things, why did they frame him with PCP? It's like the marquee drug at this time was cocaine, and it was like, I'm guessing they don't frame him with cocaine because it wouldn't have been that surprising to see a trader, a wealthy trader with cocaine in his pocket.
Well, I remember the PCP scare from this era.
Maybe that's it.
It was kind of the bath salts of the era.
Yeah.
And I think they were saying, this guy, we're just going to think of like the craziest drug we can.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they're like, heroin. It's not heroin. It's PCP. He keeps correcting them. That's a funny joke, actually, where he has to correct people on the drugs that were planted in his jacket. That's one of that, and Bo Diddley being the pawn shop owner were two of the best bits that I enjoyed of this movie. And the only other thing I would say is that there's a minor plot point where his fever starts to come down, and she's like sort of nursing him back to health, where it kind of feels like what should happen next in the movie is he starts figuring stuff out and taking matters into his own hands. Instead, he goes into a further decline. That's where he dresses as Santa. He goes back to the club. He threatens everybody with a gun, and then he gets super, super drunk. But I mean, it's a minor quibble. I just thought that tonally, the shift from I'm the hooker with a heart of gold is helping me recover to I'm gonna go get drunk and threaten everybody with a gun. It's a little rough. Watching it, that was a tough shift for me to make.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the downsides to having had watched this movie over and over so many times, is that's all seamless to me, because that's just the way I've seen the movie for 30 years. So.
Yeah, and it's probably for me, as I said before, I had watched this on cable and had never seen the R-rated version of this until I bought it on Vudu and watched it. And so Jamie Lee Curtis's boobs were new to me, as were a lot of the cuss words and everything else. I mean, I had seen the edited for TV version, and like, I'm the same way. I had enjoyed this movie enormously before, but I should say a lot of what makes this successful as a movie is Eddie Murphy. I think Jamie Lee Curtis too, but Eddie Murphy is the most natural performer in this movie, and probably the best actor in this movie. And it's the same thing that drives Beverly Hills Cop to heights, another fish out of water comedy from Eddie Murphy, where probably he really elevates the material to a place where you kind of forget about all the mistakes and awfulness that it sort of has at its core, because he's such a gifted performer.
Yeah. It's this era of Eddie Murphy. I mean, he eventually moves into doing like the family movies, which when he started, he started strong. Like, I went and saw The Nutty Professor in the theater. That movie was funny.
It's good. It's good.
And then eventually you get to like Haunted Mansion, and you're just like, oh man, you're just getting a paycheck.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just working from the script. He's just kind of sleepwalking through those movies. But if you haven't seen it yet, This Is Dolomite is on Netflix, and it is fantastic, and it will remind you very much of this era of Eddie Murphy. And he's apparently, I think it's already in the can, shot Coming to America 2.
Yes, and I'm excited. I mean, I've been encouraged by. I haven't seen Dolomite yet, so I haven't seen that yet. But I am glad to see him working again, because I think even in this bad stuff, you get a feel for what not just a gifted mimic he is, because he is that, but he's not just that. He is a really talented performer and actor, and it's just he seems to elevate a lot of the stuff that he's in, even when the things that he's in maybe don't have a right to be very good.
It makes me want to watch 48 Hours again, because that was kind of the dramedy that he was in around this time.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, he really exploded. So
that's pretty gritty. So I had seen that. I rewatched that, and that is really it's a very R-rated movie, and Nick Nolte is very racist in that movie. And it is something that you forget when you go back there. You come back there, you're like, whoa, this movie is a lot more, and I think maybe it's that we have forgotten. I mean, they drop the N-word in Trading Places too. Yeah. We forget how kind of explicitly racist people were on film in the 80s, and it can be difficult from our 90s and 2000 perspective to go back there and sort of realize that.
Yeah. I hate to break it to you, it's 2020. We're way past the 90s perspective at this point.
Oh man, we are old.
We're super old. That seems like as good a place to stop as any.
I agree. I'm ready to sign off.
But I guess happy holidays, even though it's like January something.
Yeah, we didn't spend a lot of time. I think most of the Christmas in this movie is the is the decorations.
Yeah.
But
Jamie Lee Curtis
yeah,
wears a fetching Christmas sweater at some point.
She does, and everything turns out for our heroes in the end. So
that's right.
That's a good element too. They get what they want under their Christmas tree, and the Dukes get what having the Duke boys. Can we call them the Duke boys? The Duke men. Different Dukes. They get what's coming to them. Well, Merry Christmas, Ryan. Thanks for inviting me on to talk about Christmas movies that aren't really Christmas movies.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Now we can now start thinking of what the theme can be for next year for the holidays. So,
yeah, right. Absolutely.
Thanks so much, everybody. We'll be back soon.
Thanks.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. You can drop comments on this podcast and let us know what you think. We do have a Signal Watch Patreon, and if you're so moved, we'd most certainly appreciate your support. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies. You've got to be kind.